And so as people come in, we'll have them sign in. We're going to pass a sign-in sheet around. If you would just put your name and some contact information. I'm Gary Bertolite. I'm the regional supervisor here for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. We have most of the biologists, if not all the biologists here for all the region. And what we're going to go over is the 2005 elk management plan rewrite, which is since 2005, the landscape and elk and everything else has changed. So what Fish, Wildlife, and Parks wants to do is get the public to provide us their ideas of what our elk management should be at a local level and what our objectives should be for each one of our elk management areas. And so tonight we're going to give kind of an update on pretty much the whole region and all our elk management areas. We're going to start up on the northwest part and work our way around and then back down into the breaks for those elk management areas. Public input is important to create a document and a management plan that's effective on the ground as of today. Like I said, what we had in 2005 is considerably different than what we have today, not only in elk numbers, but land ownership, a whole host of things that have changed, regulations, everything. So it's up to you as the public to provide us what you think is relevant and important to you moving forward in elk. Management objectives, and we'll go over what all those objectives are, so that the plan really does give us the opportunity to manage elk like the public wants, whether it be a landowner, an outfitter, a sportsman, a general interest person, group, whatever. The best way to give comment, you can give comment tonight. We've got some comment cards over here. You can write those down. We'll get them entered in the record. The best way to give public comment as we move forward is go to our FWP website and key into that elk management plan, and it'll give you, you can comment on every single elk management unit. You can give some general comment. All of that's available to you, but that's the best way to get it in there so it's in the record as you want it stated. Okay? So we won't take verbal comments just because I don't want to misconstrue what you actually said. Let's see. Comments are due by October 15th. Once those comments are done, a draft is created out of that. The commission will look at it. It'll then go back out for public review and comment again. So you get a chance here to develop it. And then once it's developed, if it isn't exactly what you think it should be, you get another chance to look at that and put your comments in. So tonight, just for the agency, so we have a recording of this meeting, we're recording this. So if you don't want to say anything abusive and destructive, don't say it. It'll be in the recording. But we're going to go through this. And again, once I finished here, Corey will get a little bit of introduction, and then we'll go around and just do a short, what the objective is for that elk management unit, what the objectives are and where we are within that, and then move on to the next one. If you want to ask questions at that time, feel free to. You can wait until the end and we can have that discussion. And then at the end, if we feel like we're going to break up and you want to leave, we'll stay as long as you guys want to have a discussion on it. And we'll stop the recording and we'll just have a discussion on what goes next. Your questions, answers, if it's about elk, fine. If it's about something else, we'll talk about that too. So
Gary, we can always stop this at the end too. We haven't recorded any of our other meetings, but each region has to have one recording with all the districts in it. So somebody in Kalispell can jump on and see what we did here in Great Falls. So this is our one night when we're going to record all the biology programs. If somebody wants to ask questions or do comments after the recording, we can stop the recording at the end. We can do it that way too.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good.
We just have to capture all this to put up on the website so somebody can go look at it down the road.
Yeah. That's good. So I'm going to introduce folks, and then if we could just introduce yourself, who you are, if you represent yourself, if you're a landowner, just a brief introduction, just so we know who's in the room. Gets us a little bit better understanding what we're going to listen to. Corey Lecker.
Corey Lecker, Region 4 Wildlife Manager here in Great Falls.
I'm Ryan Roucher, Conard Area Wildlife Biologist.
Jay Colby, wildlife biologist based out of White Sulphur.
Sonia Anderson, Lewistown Area Wildlife Biologist.
Jake Delegate, Great Falls.
Dave Hager, run the information person here in Great Falls.
Brett Launer, biologist out of Fairfield, Augusta area.
Justin Bell, Great Falls.
Jeremy Miller, Great Falls. Curtis Lights, Great Falls.
Alec Panero, Great Falls.
Vince Luperell, Great Falls.
Brad Lencioni, Great Falls. Cliff Garnish, Great Falls.
Steve Garnes, Great Falls.
Luke Holzhammer, San Cooley. Max Evans, Region 4 wildlife technician, Great Falls.
Right here.
Morgan Marks, live in Great Falls, work for Montana Wildlife Federation.
Nate McVita, Great Falls. Jeff Lucas, I also work for Montana Wildlife Federation. I'm actually from Missoula.
Jens Medell, Cedar Lake.
John Gregory, Great Falls.
Dan Lencioni, Great Falls.
Emma Lake, Great Falls.
Jim Thomas in Stanford, and I'm on the Citizens Advisory Council for this FWP region.
Coulter Dahlstrom, Great Falls.
Brandon Gould, home, certified professional range management, rancher, and public land outfitter.
Randy Knowles, and I'm from Great Falls, but I'm also on the Citizen Advisory Committee for Region 4, and life member of Safari Club International, member of the Montana Wildlife Federation, member of the Montana Wilderness Society, member of Pheasants Forever, and life member of the NRA. And that's not all of them.
It's a tough act to follow. Matt Voigt, I like to hunt elk. I'm not a Great Falls.
John Robbins from Great Falls.
Robert Kovac, San Cooley. Richard Wild, San Cooley.
Yeah, appreciate everybody coming. Again, open forum. If you have questions, feel free to ask. We're here to kind of engage, get people's thinking about what we're doing, so that we can get some feedback moving forward, so we can get this plan ready. So here's Corey.
So as Gary mentioned, this process for scoping lasts until October 15th. You can comment here, you can mail in your comments. We have the address for that. This is our website. And what you see on the website is the same exact thing you're gonna see tonight. So this is straight to our website, how to input your comments, where to mail a comment, email a comment. You can go to any hunting district in the state of Montana. Click on, I don't know if anybody's familiar with this yet, but so say you hunt in 412, you download the information. Here's exactly what you're gonna see tonight. Here's the objective in the past, little survey data, and how to comment on that district. So we're gonna go through the same thing tonight. Is that not working? Oh, new share. Let's see, let me get that to work. Okay, there it is. So that's an example of 412. So each biologist is here tonight from Region 4 to go through their management unit districts, elk management unit districts, go through each one of these, talk about the past objective, what should the future look like, and to get your input. So does anybody have any questions before we start? Hopefully we can get through it quickly. Okay. So everybody here is probably pretty familiar with Region 4. We're going to focus on Region 4, obviously. If you have other questions from other parts of the state, we can try to answer or direct you to that area biologist or manager for that region. Here's Region 4's hunting districts. Region 4 is pretty big, as you know, from the North Rocky Mountain front, Continental Divide all the way down to Martinsdale, and then clear east of 410 in the Muscle Shell River drainage. So it's a big region. A lot of elk issues across the region. It's not new to anybody. A lot of things have changed since 2005. If you look at the old plan, here's a 92 plan. Here's a 2005 plan, a little bigger. But a lot of the same issues that occurred in those years, still same thing today. Too many elk, not enough elk, can't get to the elk, same issues. So what we're here to do, just like all the other meetings we have in Region 4, we're having them, I think, in 8 to 10 communities across the region in the next few weeks. Had 2 in Lewistown, 1 in Winnet already. And then this week is White Sulphur, Chester. We have Stanford, Shoto, next week Fort Benton, or end of the month Fort Benton. So all the communities get the same information. But for you to provide information for your local hunting district, what it should look like in the future is very important. So now's your chance. Okay, so with that, Ryan Roush, there's a couple of statewide topics here asking for a comment on. I'll go through those quick. Current population objectives right now in an elk management unit, which may consist of 1 hunting district, and might be multiple hunting districts, is expressed as a desired number of elk counted, and typically a range around that. Sometimes it's 10%, sometimes it's 20%. So if an elk management unit has an objective of 1,000 elk, plus or minus 20%, that's the range. So in the past, that's how things were portrayed in the elk plan. The range accounts for anticipated variability in elk counts among years. So the question being asked is, should FWP maintain the current form of objective, which is a point value with a range, or should FWP consider alternative population objective forms, like using a long-term average or a shorter-term average, 5 years, 10 years, plus or minus a range of 20%, 10%? What are your thoughts? The second one is elk populations are classified into objective status using annual or biennial survey data. Because there's often variation among surveys, would it be more appropriate to use individual survey years or 3-year average to determine objective status for the hunting district or EMU? Or would you recommend some other approach? That's the second question. And those are both listed on the statewide ask for comments as well.
So Corey, maybe explain why there is variability in our surveys, so people understand what the survey is and what the variable is.
Yeah, typically an individual biologist would love to try to fly every single year. Some places that's not possible. For example, some of our larger districts, we don't fly every year, we fly every other year. Some parts of the state, due to weather, they can't fly, every 2 to 3 years. We have pilot availability. We have 1 pilot for part of Region 4. We have 1 in Lewistown. Sometimes these pilots are flying 2, 3, 4 biologists. And when it snows 2 feet, the pilot's phone is ringing off the hook trying to get surveys flown. And each biologist has 3 to 6 elk hunting districts that they want to fly. And now with shoulder season hunting, some lasting till January 15th, some to February 15th, getting that window to survey before the spring green up starts coming in April, it's a short window in there. So, it varies amongst biologists. For us, we use a combination of helicopter and fixed wing, mostly fixed wing. Some places use strictly all helicopter. And we only have 3 helicopters in the state to fly with. So our chopper pilot comes out of Helena. If Ryan wants to fly the North Front, he has to use our pilot out of Dutton or Helena, or the chopper out of Helena. So it's really limited for some people.
What's a long flight or a short flight?
Well, it depends on the hunting district, but most biologists, when you get up in the air, you're flying the majority of the day. They'll land and get gas. It's obviously a limitation for fuel for the chopper or a plane. But so Devil's Kitchen, Jake takes what? 7 to 10 hours. Land and keep going. And fly multiple districts if you can. And then another component is trying to get elk herds that share between biologists, say north side of 446, south side of 445. These guys try to fly the same day or the next day, so that way those elk aren't double counted. And it depends on survey technique, whether it's a chopper or a fixed wing, or if you're flying sagebrush country versus prairie grassland where they're on the winter ranges. A 7-hour flight for Jake to count 4,500 elk, for Sonia to fly 410 takes 30 to 40 hours, 60 hours, because of tighter contours and just visibility of elk. So it varies.
Who decides the objective numbers, the biologist or the chairman?
The chairman, what do you mean, the commission?
Yeah, the commission.
So in the past process, we had meetings just like this in your local areas, and it's based on landowner inputs, tolerance of habitat, might be competition with mule deer, it might be competition with other things, habitat availability. The biologists will put together, I'm not sure if it's going to be a range coming out of this, but say there's a draft that comes out for the Highwoods. In the past, it was 700. And based on 3.5 months of scoping, Jake hears from landowners, new landowners, that we should have way more than 700 elk. But based on habitat, what's available in the Highwoods, Jake comes up with 1,000. I don't know what that's going to be. And here's the reasons why. That still is reviewed by the commission, the Fish and Wildlife Commission, yes. So the draft that comes out would get endorsed by the commission. So a commissioner could make their own objectives as well. So but you as a hunter,
There's no set way that they're gonna decide on this.
I'm not sure in this process who's ultimately going to decide, but at the end of the day, the commission would approve the plan. So they have the final say.
So this is the opportunity to say, if like Corey says, their objective in the Highwoods, even if the biologist says we can handle 1,000 elk in there, but we hear from sportsmen that says, no, we want 1,000 plus, we want a bull component of that. But the landowners say 1,000 is way too much. We don't have that tolerance. We'd like to see that 500. All of that's going to be put into the mix to create a final product which is in the plan. And that'll be all looked at from the standpoint of the commission, the agency itself as they put it together. And that's basically how that was put together originally, is that all of the publics out there expressed their opinions, what they wanted. The biologists looked at the habitat, population management, and when it all came out, it came into that balancing all those perspectives.
Yep. And it's a little bit different than it was 15 years ago. In a lot of places you guys hunt, for example, where there's some traditional landowners back in the day that they didn't want elk. And now landscapes have changed to where there's a lot more tolerance in some places where they want elk. They're growing elk for whatever reason. There's very few places we're going to sit and listen to the public where the public says there's too many elk. I mean, that's in reality, the public aren't really going to say that. So how do you combine what's available best on the ground for elk habitat? In a lot of places, we look at the competition with mule deer too. I mean, if you have elk coming out your ears, something's going to sacrifice. So keep that in mind too.
Hey, Corey.
Yep.
How much weight does the phone survey, I mean, is it used at face value, or how much weight does that carry towards the objective, the amount of tags, all of that? I
Phone
mean, if
survey.
the success ratio in that, is it just for printing in the regulations, or does that have any other effect in what you plan for the subsequent?
You're talking phone survey from harvest survey?
Yeah, so for instance, if you only get 25% kill, does that mean you triple your tags the next year, or what effect does that phone survey have on this process?
Well, the phone survey really wouldn't have much other than that's one component of,
Okay. And that's what I assumed.
Yeah, no, that's totally separate process, but,
Yeah, so
and that may
so-
change over time too.
Yeah, so in this process, we're trying to set whatever that quota is, however it's expressed, either in numbers or some other form. And then a management strategy to maintain that or manage to
Yep.
that objective or within that range, depending on how that's expressed. The tools that we use come out of that hunter survey. How many elk were harvested? Should we change the regulations? Those are all tools that we will use to meet what we put in the elk management plan. So those are the
Yeah.
tool parts. What we're looking at tonight is really focusing in on how to express our objective and how do we manage elk in that local environment.
The Harvest Survey made, a good example would be, so if a hunting district or an EMU says that you want 60% of the bull harvest to be 6 point or better, that's one of the objectives for bulls, say in whatever, 412. So the Harvest Survey does ask you that question. Did you harvest a bull? How many points did it have on one antler? So that could be a component of, how we can gauge an objective for bulls. Each EMU, you think, 10,000 foot level would have, the old plan had a standard package to keep you in that objective area. It has a liberal package and then a restrictive package based on what the surveys look at. But the Harvest Survey would just be a component, small. Okay, we do have a few districts, deer and elk districts in Region 4, where for quite some time, if you want to call it a no-fly zone, it was an area where mainly agriculture didn't want elk populations to get established, which is, Golden Triangle, 400, 403, 404 north of Great Falls, 405 right here at Carter, 406 north of Great Falls, and then east by Stanford, 419, just northwest of Great Falls, 444 and 471. And those districts are not, it's not elk habitat, mainly ag production, grain production, and there's currently no bull objective in those districts. It's a general season. You shoot an elk, you see an elk, you can hunt an elk, obviously with landowner permission. So the question is that still acceptable? If not, what should we do with these districts?
Where is Arrow Creek in one of those districts?
Arrow Creek would be the east side of 471. The Arrow Creek breaks you're speaking of?
Yeah, aren't
It's
the
kind of on the
migrate
edge.
up,
Yeah, there's some there, some in Arrow Creek, yeah.
Migrate up.
Yeah. Yep. Arrow Creek on the east side is 426,
Oh,
which is an elk unit.
okay.
Yep.
Corey, are any of those areas up there significant elk habitat now compared to 2005?
No, that I would say no, other than, like speak of Arrow Creek breaks maybe a little bit, but that's not really, that's mainly part of the high woods in 426. The rest of these are just Golden Triangle north of Great Falls mainly,
There are a few elk
Few.
down in those districts
Few.
along the riparian areas where there is some breaks that's not farmed, but they're few and far between. And we do get a little bit of harvest every once in a while, but established elk herds, no, we don't have any in those.
Yeah.
And as far as habitat, very little.
Okay.
More mule deer and whitetail.
More mule deer.
Country,
Antelope.
antelope.
Okay, so each biologist, we package their districts. So that way the biologist can come up, go through their districts. If you guys have any questions during or after, they can go through their districts and hopefully answer any questions you have. So up first, I have Ryan Rauscher.
The first elk management unit that I have is a Sweetgrass Hills. It's separate.
Excuse me,
Being,
Ryan. We had some feedback about the, how quiet or loud it is on the recording. Speaking loud is a good thing.
okay, I thought I was. Okay, so elk management unit, Sweetgrass Hills, it's an island mountain range. It is its own elk management unit. The current population objective for 401, again, set in 2005, was 350 head of elk. And that range is plus or minus 20%, which is 280 to 420 elk. There is a bull objective in the Sweetgrass Hills, and that is 15 bulls per 100 cows during the late winter surveys. That area is typically surveyed in January or February. The questions that are asked is, do you think those are appropriate objectives as far as numbers and appropriate bull objective? I think page down, Corey.
How big is that herd now?
We're right here, right now.
Oh, okay.
So what you see on these graphs, and you'll see them the rest of the way through, is that band is the objective, and the dotted line is the current population counts. And if there's a gap, that means that year we, for whatever reason, we couldn't get a count, helicopter availability, got too late, et cetera. For elk were in the trees when you tried to count them, couldn't get them out, those kind of things. Currently, we're at approximately 600 elk in that district. And it's its own separate hunting district as well. It's general season on antlerless elk, and also the elk B license is available there. Bull elk are permit only during the general season. And this year there are archery is antlered elk on archery is available too. Any questions there?
What's the bull?
That runs about 28 bulls per 100 cows.
Yeah, so within this, and we'll go through all the hunting districts and elk management units, we're gonna have the exact kind of same presentation here. So as we go through this, if you look at the range and we move forward, is that what we want to see? Is that the range we want to see? Is that what we want to shoot for? Knowing that we're over objective, those are the things we're asking the question. Is this the right way to express that? Should it be a range from 100 to 700? Should it be just a solid number? Should it be something totally different in expressing what our objective is? And we'll go through some more of these as we go through these, and maybe there'll be some ideas, and we'll talk about them, because I've heard different ideas from different meetings that we've been at. But as we go through these, think about those: the objective range, the objective, and notice we're over objective there.
So is the herd unhealthy?
No.
It's above objective, but their health
No, to judge health, it'd be a little bit different process, but I can say that there's very few elk predators in the Sweetgrass Hills, and I have a high calf-cow ratio. So production is good.
So where does this objective fall to recommendations from wild?
I'm sorry, you're gonna have to ask that a little differently.
What was the objective is the range or the quota that was?
That was developed through the last season's or last elk planning process. So like this one, it had scoping, just like this meeting. It would also have had recommendations from the biologists who talked to all the landowners and the various interested parties. We would have gone to the commission, a draft would have came out, reviewed by the public, and come back. And that's how that band for the rest of these graphs has been set. Okay, so it's not just a biologist, it's the entire process that developed that band.
So is there very much cattle grazing in the Sweetgrass Hills?
The Sweetgrass Hills is almost entirely private land where there is grass. So yes, there is a lot of cattle grazing there.
We had a question over here.
Well, just a comment in general for the whole state, really, not just Region 4, but how can you come up with a reasonable objective when you don't break out huntable elk and non-huntable elk? What good is it to come up and say we're over objective when 70 or 80% of the elk are on private property that aren't huntable or huntable with very limited? aren't you doing a disservice to the few elk that are out on private or public ground that can be hunted?
And is that not in that is, that language is in the elk management plan?
Okay, so that is a good question. So that is something that if you are thinking about this, you might want to make a comment on
I
that.
have already.
Okay,
And it doesn't seem doing
in the
it.
process. Well, this rewrite will probably address that because like Corey said, and I've said, if this isn't reflecting on what's reality up there, let's address what reality is.
And I hunt,
And-
you know, I hunt primary, but it can be done region 4 too. But I hunt mostly over in region 2. And the area I hunt is the Pintlers over there. And they come up with these numbers of all the elk, but if you go over there, they aren't on public ground. And I'm sure region 4 has the same situation in a lot of their districts.
So that is, I mean, I've heard that theme in every meeting we've been at. So I would suggest making that comment moving forward so that they can assess that in making their.
There will be, like I said,
elk management.
I have written that up 2 or 3
Okay.
times.
Another question.
Yeah, regarding shoulder seasons on all these areas, could you indicate if shoulder seasons are in use in those particular areas? And if so, are they effective? Are they meeting the objective or is it just extending the time period that available land are being grassed?
I have no shoulder season, so any districts that I mentioned, I don't have any shoulder seasons.
But any ones that.
As we move forward, the biologists mention.
Thank you.
And we did, in every meeting we've had, the shoulder seasons have come up and we've explained how the effectiveness is and isn't. So,
Any more questions on hunting district 401 for moving forward? And I'll be around, so you can ask me something later if you want to. The next elk management unit I have is in part of the Northern Rocky Mountain Front or the Bob Marshall Rocky Mountain Front, if you want to call it that, elk management unit, and that's the Badger 2 Med Country Hunting District 415. Their current objective is 200 plus or minus 20%. And bull objective is 15 bulls per 100 cows. So again, the questions are, is that a reasonable objective? And is that a reasonable bull objective? This is a graph of the current elk population in hunting district 415. Same thing goes again, the band shows the objective range and the dotted line shows the current population.
How come such a drastic drop from 300 going straight down?
We implemented some different management in that part because it was objective. And we've also had some tough counting conditions in that area. So it's been, and we share these elk across into the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. So can be some distribution that they move farther out. I can't find them, spend a little bit of time, quite a bit of time looking for them.
So being that right now is at the low end of your objective numbers, have you guys corrected it? So we keep those elk in the objective?
So we will see what our,
It's way low. That's kind of the scary part on these things.
we will see while we come out. Our regulations have not changed significantly for that hunting district through this process. We will, if we have a lower number outside, because right now I'm in the standard package for that. I'm not in a liberal package or a conservative package for regulation. If that number is below, then we will look at putting in a more conservative package. But right now I'm within my objective. So regulations haven't changed, even though they've moved down. And another significant thing for hunting district 415 is over 70% of that hunting district is burned in the last 10 years. So we've lost some of the security habitat, but we're now starting to getting back some better range conditions for elk than that dark full timber. So we're starting to recover from some of that.
Has there been any significant
uptick in large carnivore predation on the elk herd in that area?
You know, it's hard to say about predation and what effects that has. We do know that there's significant wolf numbers on the reservation in different areas. They have quite a bit of concern there about, you know, the wolf numbers. And there are, we know of at least one pack within the hunting district 415. But to point a finger at that and say that's it, that's a difficult task to do without a lot of more research.
Does the reservation have to follow wolf rules?
That's beyond me. That would be Gary's question.
The reservation has their own rules. They can
For wolves?
for anything.
Okay.
So it's a good question on predators. In 2005, our predator number of wolves was, so that might be something that as we think about it, especially in these hunting districts that may have the presence of a big predator like wolves, grizzly bear numbers increasing. Maybe those are some of the comments you make in your management. Address elk numbers in relationship to predator dynamics or something like that. So again, those are some of the significant change. That's a significant change from what we had in 2005.
I guess, looking at it from my perspective, if the cow-calf ratio is still decent, even if the overall herd size is down, but calf recruitment's there, would
That
point to maybe a
the calf,
cat or
we typically run in the 30s and it's been fairly steady. One of the things as I look at this, I think about, you know, that particular survey, we've had a group of about 50 to 75 head of elk that have now moved north of Highway 2, where they haven't been there before. And that's an area that I haven't surveyed. That's not part of my normal survey area. They've moved north of Highway 2 on the reservation. And just this winter, we found those elk. So I may have some elk that have moved out of my district during my winter counts. This is typically counted in late January, early February. So
You're thinking they moved back?
I'm thinking they moved farther north and they were outside of my normal trend area. So that's one of the things I'll be looking at this year.
They'll migrate back into the hunting district?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
They winter out out there. Another part of this is to answer to some of your questions is we're in a cooperative elk research project right now with the Blackfeet tribe, and about 20 to 25 cow elk in this district are now collared. So we're being able to follow those elk. So we're looking at that. It's not like, you know, oh, they're going down. We're not aware of it, or we're not addressing any issues. Any more questions on 415? The bull cow ratio runs in the mid 20s in that particular hunting district. Another part of the Bob Marshall is hunting district 441. The current population objective for that is 500 elk counted. The 20% is obviously 400 to 600, and the hunting objective is 15 to 100, or the bull objective is 15 bulls per 100 cows. You already know what the questions are, so I'll move on. And this is what our trend counts look for that area, staying fairly well in objective. Any questions on hunting district 441? Okay, that's the end of my, who is next? Brent is next. I'll be around if you have any questions, and I have more data if you want to look at that.
All right, so I'm Brent Launer. I'm the biologist south of Ryan, north of Jake. Doggett will be up shortly. So for my areas, I've got, I think 1, 2, 3, 4 of these in here. We'll start with 450. Again, like Ryan just said, it's the same questions at the bottom. You can see what that objective is for that hunting district 450. This is one of those for me, and to some degree, Ryan, we're dealing with it right now with game damage going on, but where we're nowhere near this objective anymore compared, and you'll see that on the next slide. But 75 to 100 was that objective total number of elk we set out on this plan. And then 25 to 30 bulls, of which 15 of those should be brow tine bulls. So this is one of those areas where we have some sub bull objectives specific to this hunting district. We also changed some hunting regulations in here just this. Well, this is the first year these regulations have taken into effect. But you see where we're at there on elk numbers. Of course, that's a low objective, 75 to 100 total numbers of elk. But those elk, there's two main herds in that group, and you can see where the elk numbers have climbed to currently.
So what's the geographic?
So for yep, good question. 450 is everything south of the Teton River Road as you go up like Teton Ski Pass. And everything south of there down to the Sun River, the river itself. And then the actual forest boundary to the west. So you got a big group of elk in Deep Creek and then another group of elk down in that lives along that Teton corridor, the Teton River corridor.
And that's primarily private property in through there?
For the most part, yeah, scattered state lands, but a lot of private. And there's those two different groups. That Deep Creek group of elk was not there before, for the most part, when this in 17 years ago.
Do they come from someplace?
I think they're more or less a split off of Sun River elk. That's just my take.
Your guess.
So Brent, to answer one question before we go, the question, do we have a shoulder season in there first?
Yep, no shoulder season. Believe it or not, there is no shoulder season in here as of now. Not to say that isn't going to happen. But to me, there's reasons for that. I've talked to lots of the landowners in there and some of the local sports folks in that area as well about the idea of early or late shoulder seasons, but we haven't gone that direction so far. But we may or may not choose to go that route down the road.
How is access to?
Therein lies one of the reasons why we don't have, to some degree, a shoulder season because of access.
Is that the result of 600 head there now?
Yep, to some degree. Yep.
What's the social tolerance on the 600 it'd be in that far above the objective?
Surprisingly, it's better than you'd expect, but it's definitely not tolerable by everybody, especially certain landowners.
So we deal with game damage in that area regularly every year.
Yep. And that's mainly on that Teton, the river bottom there. You get into Deep Creek, and it's a little different. There's a little more tolerance for big numbers of elk there.
So what's the primary agriculture in that area?
Ranching, a little bit of ag farming, but mainly cattle. Some of the larger landowners down in the Deep Creek area are bison. It's a pretty big bison herds.
Have a bunch of alfalfa fields?
In places, yep.
Pivots?
Yep, irrigated pivots, and that's down in that Teton area, that's one of the issues.
75 to 100 head, that sounds like an impossible objective.
Yeah.
You have a good calf producing spring,
It's that, yeah, this is one, depending on how the objectives shake out, this is one of those areas. That objective, however we define objective is going to change. We can't realistically manage to get that back down.
The whole herd in one bad winter.
Yeah.
And if you look at that 2005, the objective was set way low, but look at the numbers of elk in there in 2005. It was actually right at the lower end of the objective.
Because it's 75 to 100 head of elk, I'll count 75 to 100 bulls in that area. So
You said something about damage hunts. Is that damage hunts going on the alfalfa or going on haystacks?
everything.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of everything, ag ground, alfalfa ground, irrigated, non-irrigated haystacks.
Are there many of the guys raising grass hay?
I can't say for sure exactly what sort of hay they're raising.
How do you think, so how do you, as the biologist, kind of taking care of this little area here, I'm assuming you're kind of the one of the main guys who's gonna come up with a number here, I would sure assume. I suppose with landowner input and some sportsman input. So, I mean, this, you throw a number like this out at a meeting like this, it's. Would it be better to come to a meeting like this and say, hey, this is kind of what we're thinking, we've met with the landowners, the sportsmen up there. We'd like to see a 400 to 600 objective.
Yeah, and we've had some of those conversations on a local level, but not to the point of starting to define of what would be more appropriate. I've got thoughts in my own mind, but that's part of this. So landowners, local sportsmen, anybody up that we're throwing all these people together as far as making comments. So I'm hoping that they're getting in here and making comments too. So we take that into account, and in addition to local conversations, talking to our game warden, dealing with the game damage issues, where I have more kind of real-time conversations with folks to help define where we might be down the road. Part of that, though, is we don't know how we're going to define an objective yet. Is it going to be that range? Is it going to be a long-term average perspective, a percentage of one of those, or something else? I don't know.
Brad, that's what should come at the next meeting this week, is the draft. So he can say, based on season setting this last winter, when Shoto, we had 15 people at the meeting, and then he has his meeting coming up this week.
Shoto is Thursday, yep.
Yeah. Then you can get a feel for what that should look like.
So one other thing, Brad, and this is for everybody, right now, the law that's in place now states that FWP will manage to objectives. So in this next elk management plan, what are we gonna do about scenarios like this? 700 hunting districts are very similar to this, where their objective, they didn't even have elk hunting. Their objective is very low and low. So in response to that, and trying to put together a management plan that addresses not only the statutory requirement for us to manage to objective, is again, putting a plan together that says we can do that. And so can you go back one? So I mean, we could manage to objective with this new management plan by just taking this and putting it way up here. We're at objective or below objective, but that's not the purpose. Purpose is to really look at this and say, what are all of the inputs? Tolerance of landowners, sportsman desires, is it numbers of elk? Is it something else? And come up with that, and then put together a management plan that we can actually implement and get to an objective.
But I also think what you're saying, as a sportsman, we better look for in the future any other changes, or as a landowner, I guess, or as an outfitter, that we better try to get that range broadened on there, first of all, and keep it up on the higher end of things. Otherwise, legislature can come back here and tell you how to manage your elk, right?
Well, that's one of the things that's actually in place. Legislature told us to manage within a 2005 objective,
so
which is or is not realistic. But we have, right now, we have the legislative authority says we need to manage to this level right here for this hunting.
And I think the first slide that we showed says, what it is right now. It's a number with the range, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody looks at, to be honest with you, they don't look at the range. They look at that number. You're over at 1, you're over. So that's one of the questions is, do you use a number now, or do you use a range? Do you use a wide range? And it depends on the hunting district. If you're talking about 400 elk, plus or minus 20% still isn't that much. If you're talking 3,000, that range is a lot different.
I mean, you could express, and you were at the last one, you could express our objective as we will manage elk in this hunting district to a point where we have no more than 5 game damage complaints a year. I mean, that's an objective. Is that realistic? Is that a manageable tool? I don't know. I'm just seeing, it doesn't have to be a number. It doesn't have to be a range. It could be a whole host of things put together. Like we have a range here, how many bulls per 100 cows. And you saw Ryan's had 15 to 100 cows in one, and I don't know what the other one was, 410 is 30 cows, or 30 bulls for 100 cows. Again, all of those things, we want to see what's effective in this. And obviously, this one's way out of whack compared to what we've got on the ground. So you had a question back here.
Is the objective for this particular district been the same since 2005? You guys aren't able to go in during season setting and move that up or down. Because with Senate Bill 42 or Debbie Barrett's bill, that you have to manage to objective. That shows me from 2007's count to present day, we haven't done anything. We have not had objective. Like how are we managing them to objective by state statute? But since 2007, you've been over your objective.
Correct.
But
we have not.
So, but why is that? Like what?
Okay,
is
so-
it because landowners aren't allowing people to get in there? Is it?
So there's a whole host of things why, and I'm not sure in this particular instance, but it could be access. It could be our regulations didn't keep up with the population growth. Could be a whole host of things. What, better reproduction than we ever planned. It could be a whole host of things. Like in one of Ryan's things, where we see a drop, could that be a result of a new predator on the landscape? So it's not just one thing, it's a combination of a whole host of things. A lot of the things we're seeing across the state is access to harvest. And that is creating growth in that population.
That is a good question, though. It's because what you mentioned was season setting, which occurs for us every other year. And this thing since 2005, correct me if I'm wrong, was only opened to change maybe one time, if that, an updated elk management unit objective. It doesn't happen very often, I guess is what my point is. So when this comes out at final in say 2023 sometime, the likelihood of anything changing in there for an objective, there might have to be some drastic changes in the hunting district to be able to change that. Not that you can't go do it, but you're better off doing it right now. This is what I wanted to see the next 15 years, at least 10 years, for this self-management unit. You can't just go in every 2 years and change. There's obviously pros and cons to doing that.
Or you could make your objective, every 2 years, we assess it and change your objective to.
But that is
meet
one of the questions too.
special
Is
needs.
Do you want to look at surveys every 3 years? And your objective changes based on 3 years of surveys, based on 5 years of surveys, and there's pros and cons of doing that too.
Yeah, again, that's why we're here. We want to, you see the scenarios on the ground, you see what's happened since 2005. Is expressing an objective like this that doesn't change for that many years reflective of what's on the ground and good management. If it isn't, what is? Question here.
Yeah, 450 there, what would be the rough percentage of private versus public land in that area?
I couldn't say. The majority is private, for sure.
Access usually difficult or percentage of that?
Yeah, it can be in places, depending on the distribution of elk. Yeah, the access to those elk can be difficult at times.
So there's some large landowners that don't care how many elk are on their property.
Yes and no.
Depending on whether you're by the Teton or you're by Deep Creek, is that what you're saying?
Well, even then, yes and no.
I think.
And I don't want to put Brent in saying what a landowner does and doesn't do.
No.
What a landowner thinks and doesn't think, that's not Brent's.
Well, I know, but if half of that hunting area, the landowners don't care how many elk there are, that certainly creates problems because we know the elk don't say, well, we're going to stay here because he likes us. They go wherever they want to go. So, I mean, that's part of the formula is even probably the worst case scenario is you've got scattered landowners in the district that don't care so that the elk can be in the morning on land where the guy doesn't allow any hunting because he likes elk. And in the afternoon, they're across the fence on some guy's alfalfa pivot. And, that just creates a whole new dynamic.
Yeah, well, that's the dynamics we're under. And could be across this, and there's a whole host of other dynamics that are occurring.
Sure.
Some of the questions you guys are asking though are applicable to almost every single hunting district in Region 4 of the state. So
Yeah.
there's gonna be pockets where there is hunting, there's pockets where there's no hunting, whether it's public or private, so.
Right.
Do you know what year it was legislated in that you had to manage the objective?
2005.
That came with the
No,
same year.
I think
Later.
Barrett's law came in 2015 or 13.
I think 42 was 2005, wasn't it?
I don't know, I don't think it's 2005.
Yeah, it was way later than that. Well, there might have been a bill at that time. The Barrett's bill came in later than that. And I'm thinking it's 13 or 15. I'm not sure which.
So
I mean, that's 9-10 years ago.
Law applied to an old
Yeah.
plan. That was at least 10 years old.
We can keep,
Go ahead.
I think we'll keep moving.
Yeah, just
450, if you guys have more questions specific to that area, happy to visit. But in the interest of time. Next one, Sun River, basically Sun River elk. So it's a combination of 3 different hunting districts, 424, 425, and 442. 2,000 head of elk is the objective there. Overall numbers, no, 2,500, within 10% of 2,500 head of elk is the objective for total numbers in there. And this place also has a bull objective that was set at, again, 2005. And a fair amount of this, both, especially the harvest, that the bulls, the 15% of bulls in the harvest we see, in addition to the harvest surveys, comes through that Augusta check station. So we have a little bit, another tool there to be able to help manage as far as where we want to be, at least for bull numbers related to our objectives. And you can see for this herd of elk, we've been fairly stable. We're within that objective currently, but towards the bottom end of that objective. You
How
can
are we with the bull?
bulls we're meeting that objective every year. Bull numbers are good. They're at 25 to 30 bulls, brow tine bulls per 100 cows.
As well as the age distribution.
Yep, and the age as well. Yep, that 6.5-year-old or older, 15%. We're meeting that every year. So that those objectives are generally being met, both overall numbers, bull numbers, the numbers we'd like to see. The bulk of this herd really winters on the Sun River Game Range, Sun River Wildlife Management Area. So when those numbers were high in 2011 and 12 and 13, we really got after elk numbers here. Dropped numbers, and now we've backed off. This is one of those herds though that our calf recruitment's fairly low, typically in the mid-teens. So that's something that I'm really monitoring every year related to overall harvest and the season structure we have there. That's a unique one because it runs off a quota system, so we can kind of mess with the actual harvest every year if we wanted to.
So is that cap recruitment number pretty stable? Or has it? been-
Typically, the last decade, at least, it's been pretty stable at that lower level. But enough to maintain the herd where it is in relation to the harvest that we continually get.
Do you have a theory why it's so low recruitment from the calf?
Yeah, I have a professional opinion, and to me,
Well,
it's
that's a theory.
there's a lot of things that feed into it, and I've talked to a lot of people about it, and diversity and density of predators to me is one of the I'm not saying it's the only thing, but it's a primary thing, I think, in this herd. Again, there's no research behind that. There's no hard data behind that. That's just my.
There's lots of research. You're living out there.
Yeah.
You see it.
Is there shoulder season in the sun?
No shoulder seasons here.
I think that
There's other things, there's habitat, all the normal things, annual weather, all the things that you typically influences calf numbers, but
I think that's the thing to point out with this herd is there's not as big a private land
This-
component. These are elk that don't get in trouble.
These are
which they
90+% of the year, these are public land elk. Yep.
You look at your calf production recruitment though, Brent, for you, you're more and that area is more typical to a true migratory backcountry predator prey dynamics versus then our isolated mountain ranges in region 4 where the elk migrate a total of 3 miles their whole life sometimes.
Yep.
So your ratios are much different than the rest of the region. I shouldn't say much different, but
Yeah,
that
so
comes into play a lot more so than other people.
yep. And the ratios, calf ratios here are normally lower than average traditionally. So even if I say mid-teens, that's different. That might be something, mid-teens here is maybe something more along the lines of mid to upper 20s somewhere else. I don't know. That's, just something to keep in mind, I guess.
Do you think your surveys are affected by the weather at all there? Like I see 2011 was a huge spike. Was there more elk on the game range that winter?
Yeah, and so weather, so you see, and that's a good point to make on any of these graphs. You see a wonky point in there that's high or real low all of a sudden, and it jumps back up or jumps back down. That's a reflection of survey conditions. So 2011 was the absolute perfect survey conditions that we had: cold, snow, conditions leading into that survey leading up to it. So on a perfect year, it's still not all the elk, that's that we see. On a perfect year, yeah, you can get those every once in a while where you see a high number of elk. I don't think it was a distribution thing where we had other elk from other areas coming in there. Because that was a question I had, and I was talking with the landowners and other folks in the area, and we didn't see that shift because we did the other surveys not too long before on either side of that too. So
I think what's interesting with that herd is the fact that some of those bulls stayed back and winter back on top of the mountain.
yeah, some of them are backcountry elk for sure.
So in the interest of time, we got a bunch more biologists to go. If you got a question about the objective or the management of that, feel free to ask as we go through this, but if you have specific instances you want to talk about or ask questions of, can you hold them till the end so we can get through these? Because there may be somebody that's interested in 410 or 411 or something else. I want to get through all of them. So you're not sitting here until 11 o'clock tonight. I shared a whole 10.
Gary, you already said you'd stay here as long as.
I will stay here as long as you want. I didn't say I wouldn't. I just said I would like to. At 11 o'clock.
So for 422, it's kind of a mix between the last two districts or two groups of elk we talked about. This is south of the Benchmark Road down to Highway 200, Haystack, Butte, Smith Creek, Elk Creek area. But for those familiar with any of that area, the objective was 500 to be within 10% of 500 elk at the time. Low bull cow, traditionally a low bull cow ratio objective for this area, which is still typically normal. 5 to 10 bulls per 100 cows is what we normally see. But even then, we've got numbers down. This is a shoulder season area, early and late. We have got numbers down considerably from where they were about a decade ago or less than that, at least at the peak. And now we've been stable when we introduce these shoulder season. It's capping elk numbers, but we don't seem to have the ability to get it down to where that traditional objective used to be. Any questions on 422?
That 1,000 seemed to be pretty sustainable about where we're.
It's pretty consistent right now, and there's two different groups of elk in there basically. It's kind of a north herd and a south herd, and they're both about 500 or so head of elk typically every year. This is an area we do share elk with on the region 2 side, on the other side of the divide. So again, that's part of that balance. Now you're talking two different regions that have maybe different management styles based on the different perspectives of, you know, where the elk are and what's going on either side of a mountain range.
Have we colored any of these to see where they migrate to?
No,
Okay.
no, not on this herd, any of these. And last one for me, 421, the Birdtail Hills. This was two different hunting districts. We did just combine these last year. This is the first year it'll be combined. So it's one hunting district. They're fairly similar management styles, but they were managed as one elk management unit to begin with anyway. It's a 20% range on either side of 500 head of elk for this herd. And again, the same low bull cow ratio, at least that minimum target. And you can see where numbers have been. Shoulder seasons are in place here. And you can see how it has that 2021 count was an example of a poor survey. It was flown last year in March. By the time we could actually fly it, we didn't get a good count. But you can see this year the count was, you know, higher than what we've seen at least the last few years. So
What about 2012?
13. That spike to me, those previous years was less than ideal survey conditions and poor counts compared to what was actually going on.
So you're thinking 13 is more accurate number?
Yeah, and that was probably, I can't say for sure, at one of those real good survey years. So it showed you what the potential could be on a really good survey count, but any questions about the bird tails?
What do you have to do to push the bull number up?
Shoot fewer bulls. Produce more calves, shoot fewer bulls. It totally varies. It depends on the area. I mean, if you really want to get after more bulls, older bulls, bigger bulls, well, not necessarily bigger bulls, but more bulls is ideally from a hunting perspective is limit that harvest. Then you're looking at going to something like permits. You know, and at least from a management world.
That area is not permitted?
It's an either sex season. It's managed like 422. It's just managed for either sex opportunity. Not managed for that bull age structure necessarily, just managed for general elk opportunity.
What's the ratio?
Well, typically we're in that 5 to 10.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Typically it's 5 to 10. Kind of lower, but it's fair. We're normally recently in about 20 to low 20s per 100 cows. So it's lower than what we would see in other places, but it's not as bad as what we see a little bit further north in like Sun River. But it's enough to maintain high numbers. What's that?
Any predator issues?
Nothing that significant that that stands out to me. Certainly predators there, but any other? I think that's it for me. Yeah, we'll jump to Jake next.
Hi, I'm Jake Doggett. I'm the Great Falls area biologist. Get a little intimidated when I have to talk about our stuff because I've only been around for a couple of years and I don't have everything memorized yet and get to it. Some of the stuff isn't at the top of my head. So if you do have specific questions, we might have to visit afterwards, but I'll do my best. And I got a bunch of handout material here for reference in case we need to go there. But I've got 4 hunting districts that that got elk and elk hunting, or I guess that we're talking about today. The Devil's Kitchen Elk Management Unit, 413, which just got a little bit bigger in the Little Belts and the High Woods. And first up here is the Devil's Kitchen Elk Management Unit. The Devil's Kitchen Elk Management Unit has 2 hunting districts within it, 445 and 455, which is the Beartooth WMA, right behind Holter Lake between here and Helena. In the 2005 plan, they set an objective of 2,200 elk, and they did split that between the Beartooth and the private, but as a whole, it is an elk management unit, both districts combined. 2,200 elk is that number that we were shooting for. There is a bull harvest objectives in the elk management unit in each of those districts as well. It's a little bit different than probably the majority of the elk management units across the state. In this EMU in hunting district 445, for example, we like to see at least 75% of the bulls harvested be brow tine bull or bigger, not spikes. In the Beartooth WMA, it's a little bit lower at 60%. We're exceeding that objective where I think we're around 95% in each hunting district. So we're sitting pretty good. Each time I've tried to do the math, it's come out to be, I think, right around 50 bulls per 100 cows. So pretty high bull cow ratio. You'll see that we have quite a few elk in the elk management unit. We're twice objective. We're sitting right around 4,700 elk. It's been climbing for over the last 10 years. I think opinions and tolerance and things have changed quite a bit in this elk management unit. So it's going to be important that we're having good, thorough discussions on how we want to do things going forward. The next elk management unit or hunting district that we're going to talk about is the Highwoods Hunting District 447. Back in 2005, they set an objective of 500 elk, but it was a couple of years later bumped up to 700. There is a bull harvest objective similar to the Devil's Kitchen elk management unit. 445 specifically, we're hoping to see 75% of the bulls harvested be older bulls. And like those other districts, we're exceeding that. We're doing really well. The Highwoods population is currently sitting at right around 1,600 elk. I guess I should say that in the Highwoods, we do have a 6-month-long shoulder season as we did. We do also have a shoulder season in hunting district 445. They are very liberal shoulder seasons, August 15th to February 15th. There's an opportunity to go elk hunting. Oh, Corey forgot 413. Okay. Jay, you okay talking about that, or should I jump ahead?
Wait till later, Jake, because it's all packaged with a little bit.
Okay. I kind of went through that quickly. Maybe got time for a question or two.
What's the landowner tolerance around the highways?
I think it's a mixed bag. Even the 2005 plan references the diversity of access opportunities for hunting elk. There is a little bit of outfitting. There's a little bit of wide open, or there's several landowners that allow you to go elk hunting. There's places where you have to pay an access fee. You don't have very much for block management, but there's the national forest smack dab in the middle of all the of the hunting district. And I've been telling a lot of people lately that's a good thing because you got more people to visit with. There's elk are distributed around the mountains pretty well. It's a kind of a healthy mix of all sorts of land ownership opinions about elk, I'd say.
Going back to the Devil's Kitchen, and my comments that I've already submitted kind of reflect this, but I feel like that one's really difficult because we hunt 455 a lot, and I'm very familiar with 445 and a lot of the ranches there and the dynamics there. And I'm concerned that those of us that hunt 455, like, there's a good number of people in there. I don't want to see 455 get way more pressure because they can't address, and I know there's a lot of difficulty with 445.
Yep.
The elk access issue in 445. I don't want us on public land, even though that's, permit area. I don't want us, seeing permits increased and we were happy when the cow permits went to, I guess not two, but you could, the option to shoot a second cow to increase the cow harvest there.
Yeah.
And so I guess just my concern with the way that elk management unit is handled, being that it's almost 445, almost private or landlocked versus public and an elk herd that shares that.
It's definitely unique. 445 is mostly private land. And right next to it is the Beartooth WMA, which is all public. But it's limited access in the Beartooth WMA. For the most part, you have to have a permit or a B license to go hunting there. And it's all about finding the right balance, because those elk will move on and off the WMA throughout the hunting season and the rest of the winter. And we do have shoulder seasons on the private right next. So we want to create an atmosphere that allows us to maximize harvest, maximize opportunity for people to get an elk, maybe relieve the burden of game damage on some of these landowners come wintertime. So getting the number of licenses and the number of people out there is super important. And I think about that all the time. I think most people would agree with you, but thanks for sharing.
Because it's so, 455 is kind of small and pretty limited there, I don't want to see things numbers drastically of people increase there.
Yep.
To address elk in 445.
No, thank you.
Thought about some of these areas where there's so much private land and then like not quite as much public land. They thought about maybe a split season where you can shoot elk certain days of the week on private land and certain days of the week on public land. So maybe they wouldn't all run to private land and stay there for the season.
It's a different idea. I haven't heard of that, but maybe these guys have been around longer have.
Well, that's one of the tools that may be used once we get the basis of the management. It's just like shoulder seasons is one of the tools that we use. So to get to an objective or work towards an objective. So that's a little bit different discussion. So, after we get through these things, we can come back to that. No, that's fine.
No worries.
That's fine. We can come back to it. That's a good question.
We keep moving on, and you guys come find me afterwards, and we can get into the details if you want.
I'm sure.
So I introduced myself earlier. I'm Sonia Anderson out of Lewistown, and the first of my districts up is Hunting District 410. It's part of the Missouri River Breaks Elk Management Unit, which is also shared between a few more districts in Region 4, but also Region 6 and 7. So the current population objective in Hunting District 410 is to observe between 2,000 and 2,300 elk. And so one of the questions here is, do you guys think we should keep that objective level maintained, or should it be increased or decreased? And then what should that new objective and range be if it were to change? Also, we have a bull objective to maintain at least 30 bulls per 100 cows observed during postseason aerial surveys. Again, is this adequate? If not, what should it be? Are you satisfied with the current elk distribution in this hunting district? And if not, are there specific objectives to address this distribution? What this question is getting at is, an example would be like public land versus private land elk, or, maybe like something like that. And then what else does the elk management plan need to include for Hunting District 410? And so here is a population graph of elk in 410. You see them as dots because I fly this survey only every other year. They have been objective for quite some time, but with our last count in 2022, they're still above objective, but they're kind of moving down towards objective. I counted, I believe, 940 bulls in 2022. The bull cow ratio was like 69 or 70 bulls per 100 cows.
From the 2017, was there a decline in like habitat, or to go from roughly 3,300 down to where we're at?
We've really upped the cow, tried different things to increase cow harvest, and I think that's contributed a lot to it.
And so this is where Objectives are the tools we use to get to objective is what Sonia did for 410, and it looks like it's working. Okay, now whether that works in other, 410 has a lot of private land, a lot of public land, a mix.
410 is 47% public land. And then the private land in 410, a lot of that is enrolled in block management. There's a lot of access.
So the
that's-
tools that she uses are effective.
Is this an area where, you know, like some in the breaks that with the increased cow harvest, we saw a distribution shift?
So back in, so this graph doesn't go back to like 2004, but prior, like early 2000s, there were also a lot of elk observed, and they had maybe like, I know it was like 400 cow tags back then, and then they upped them to 1,200, and then we saw a big shift in elk. Pretty much Region 4 went to objective or slightly below, and Region 6 all of a sudden had 1,000 head of elk. So that's kind of what happened then.
I think we did 3 years of that. First year, success for the hunters.
It was like 54% harvest
Yeah,
success.
second year that dropped, success dropped. Third year it was a social nightmare because the elk had learned and moved. And so I got a B tag and now the elk are gone and I got a lot of people to compete with. So there's dynamics there that we look at from the standpoint of biology, regulations, and social.
So is that what happened since 2018 too, is they may have went across the Muscle Shell or across the Missouri to 600 or 700 or?
You know, I'd have to look back at their counts, but I don't think so. You know, their counts have not been, they haven't had like a sudden jump of elk that would explain, oh, we've lost a lot of elk in 410 to these other districts, just based on our survey data. And then our harvest surveys have shown, like last year harvest was pretty rough because just of the conditions, but harvest has increased.
What's a calf recruitment with all the pressure?
So my last survey, the calf cow ratio was 31 calves per 100 cows. And this is after a pretty significant drought. Normally in previous years, it was in the 40s. So.
Is this a bull tag area?
Yes, it's permitted for archery and rifle for bull elk. We'll move on to 417. That's another Missouri Breaks district. The current population objective for hunting district 417 is 375 total elk with that 350 to 400 range. Do you think the current population objective should be maintained, increased, or decreased? And then if changed, what should that be? Like 410, because it's a breaks unit, we have that bull objective to maintain at least 30 bulls per 100 cows observed during the postseason surveys. Should we keep a bull objective in this hunting district? And if so, is the current one appropriate? If not, what should it be? Are you satisfied with the elk distribution in 417? And then what else does the plan need to include for this hunting district? Basically the same questions we were asking for 410. Here's a population graph for hunting district 417. You see that thin gray bar down at the bottom is our objective, and elk have been steadily increasing in hunting district 417. I normally also fly 417 every other year, every odd year, 410 every even year, 417 every odd year. We flew 417 this winter too, just because there's been a lot of issues around it. We wanted to get another count, so.
Is that where the horse ranch is in 417?
Yes, Rocket Land and Livestock.
I don't suppose you have an idea, that big increase, how much of that, where they moved on to private ground? I hunted 417 a number of years ago, and there was quite a few elk on the public ground. And
right.
Went back and and there wasn't any elk.
There have been changes in land ownership and hunter pressure and access in that hunting district.
So the increase, there's no way of telling how much of that increase actually it was on private ground.
These points are total counts for me flying the whole district. So if you want it, right.
But she can give you a map for your computer.
Yeah, well, I don't even have a smartphone, so.
How much landowner conflict do you have in 417?
It depends on the winter weather, but we generally get quite a few landowner game damage complaints.
How long ago did the 417 have a B tag option with your general?
That was it was either 2014 or 2016.
And yet it's still.
Right. Yeah.
I drew a 417 last year and I'm lucky enough to get a bull, but after the first week, it was hard to find them.
Yeah.
But private land, I mean, harder.
Yeah.
than normal.
And again, I'll be around after we can get more into the nitty gritties of these. 426, yet another breaks district. 426 is there's a lot of ag land. It borders right up to some of the Golden Triangle units. So we have a pretty low objective of 75 total elk. Do you think that current population objective should be maintained, increased, or decreased? And then if changed, what should it be? Again, we have a bull objective of at least 30 bulls per 100 cows. Is that appropriate? If not, what should it be? And then the same two questions about if you're satisfied with the elk distribution, and then what also should we consider as we're developing the plan for hunting district 426?
How far east does that district go?
It goes to PN Road and then like down onto the Salt Creek Road, just prior to hitting the Moccasin Mountains.
Does it go towards So, I drove the DY trail.
Okay, yeah, it's 417. That's hunting district 417.
Okay.
Yep.
So it must be right on the highway there, must be the.
Right,
boundary line.
right. Here is a population graph of elk in hunting district 426. We used to not fly surveys of hunting district 426 just because the objective was so low and we have a relatively low tolerance for elk there. But around 2014, 2015, we started getting game damage complaints. And so we started increasing our survey efforts, and elk have been increasing in hunting district 426. So that's 426. Oh.
Game damage complaints or those monetary benefits for
No.
landowners? They get no funding?
No, we do not reimburse landowners financially for game damage. It's like assistance via like stackyard materials or game damage hunts, kill permits, that sort of thing. Hunting district 412 is part of the Snowy Elk Management Unit, and it comprises the Judith and the Moccasin Mountains. We have a current population objective of 300 total elk with that 20% plus or minus range. Should that objective be maintained, increased, or decreased? We also have a bull objective of 412 to maintain a minimum of 45 bulls, with at least 50% of them being brow tine bulls. Is that appropriate? If it is it not, where should we be there? What are your thoughts on the elk distribution and other ideas for the plan? Here is a population map for hunting district 412, and hunting district 412 is above objective. No questions there. I'll move on. Hunting district 411 is it's kind of managed in concert with what used to be hunting district 511 and 530. Those districts were combined into one district, 535, last year. So and then there's also sub objectives for the east and west end of 411 and 535. So the sub objectives, so the east portion of 535, which used to be 530, and the eastern portion of 411 has a sub objective of 400 total elk. And then similarly, the west end of 411 and what used to be hunting district 511, which is everything west of Red Hill Road, has a sub objective of 400 total elk. Is that appropriate? One thing we've been wondering is, should we have these sub objectives? Should we just have one big objective? Should we have an objective for 411 and an objective for 535? that sort of thing. So those are kind of the questions that we're asking there.
So why wasn't that combined into one hunting district?
There's just different management situations between Region 4 and Region 5. There's, like there's 2 different biologists for the north half of the Snows and the south half of the Snows. There's different deer management that goes on the north and south side, so we kept them separate. With a cross regional boundary, it makes it very difficult. So, like.
How hard is it to change the regional boundary?
Don't want to go there.
In hunting district 411, like 412, there's a bull objective that's defined by a number. So that's a minimum of 120 bulls, with at least 50% of them being brow tined. Is that appropriate? Should we change it? If not, what should it be? Are we satisfied with the current distribution? And then what does the elk management plan need to consider for these districts? And then here is a map of the west. This is just goes by the west end of 411 and what used to be 511. We've been around 400 elk for quite a while, and then in the last few years, those numbers started to greatly increase. But still, we're talking about 800 to 1,000 elk when we're wanting 400. East Hunting District 411 and what used to be Hunting District 530. Our objective is way down there at the bottom, that gray line. And now we're sitting at, with our last survey, we were sitting at just under 9,000 total elk. Ashley Taylor is the biologist for Hunting District 535. She flies that district every year. I only fly the east end of 411 every odd year. So that's why we don't have a continuous line going there. And that's why we don't have a full elk count for 2022. That's elk in the Big and Little Snowy Mountains. And then this is looking at it, the total combined east and west ends. So an combined total of 800 elk and where we're at there.
10 plus times.
Yeah, and then that's it for my districts. Again, I'm willing to answer. I can clarify anything, and then we can answer more nitty gritties afterwards.
What's the side of the litigation? The district. Isn't the litigation that the landowners filed to eliminate the object? Is that in your area?
The lawsuit is kind of like with the whole state, and we're not involved in that. So that's
it doesn't name. Where do they reside in what district?
There is multiple districts. Yeah.
So here's one of those examples where, again, the objective is set and you're looking at 10 times the number of elk on the landscape. Is that objective even realistic? Should we change it? Should we not change it? Should we express it in different terms? These are the ones that are really pivotal to management of elk in this area, especially, is that objective was set. And when you see this kind of expansive growth, is it realistic to have that continue?
So now you get more phone calls out of this district for damage than you do out of your other districts?
I actually don't get very many game damage complaints. We do get some, but not as many as you would expect. So, and I mean that's not to say damage is not occurring.
Correct.
Continual growth, is that because of lack of access to most of the area?
That would be my professional judgment. Yes.
It has a shoulder season.
Yes, there is a shoulder season, and you can harvest up to 3 elk in the district. So.
You were just saying you want the comments on the objective. Is that realistic? Well, if you're talking to a hunter, so hell, I like lots of elk, but I'm sure you get the landowners, you're going to get a different thing. Is the I know this would be a touchy issue, but is there any data out there that shows the changes in land ownership from what we used to call the family farms and that to these big money guys coming in buying up open property. Is there any data out there like that?
I don't know of any that we've done. I don't know.
There's, I mean, it's probably possible to get, but it would be really difficult and subjective.
Yeah, I'm sure we all know areas where the guy, the original landowner did allow hunting, but somebody come in from out of state and bought it up and shut it all off.
We've got those
And,
surveys
it's hard
by,
to feel sorry for them.
we've got those numbers by region. So we did a series of surveys of landowners, is it friends and family? Is it outfitted? Is it block management? Is it, open public access? And we've got those all summarized by region 1, region 2, region 3, and the change over time. But when you start to get down to hunting district by hunting district, your sample sizes get so small that they couldn't really get any finer than that. But we do have those. Corey can get them to your ICANN by region 4 and just see the change over time. For whatever it's worth. I mean, you can't really, it is what it is, but we do have those numbers.
But that goes to the point of 2005 to present day, there is a shift of a whole lot of things. And so the 2005 objectives, when they were set, harvest levels, elk growth, all that other components of it, even, landowner tolerances might have changed, sportsman ideas might have changed. Sportsmen, you look at the demographics in the state, that's changed over time. Who's hunting for elk, why they're hunting, all those things have changed over time. So again, we go back to it. Let's reflect what reality is today so that when we put this management plan together, it's reflective of what we want now and into the future for 5 years at least. And I suspect that we'll probably address this plan in 5 to 7 years again. Instead of 20 years.
So do you see a better calf recruitment in this area?
I mean, generally, yes. They're also kind of in the 40s-ish. I'd have to go back and look at the specific survey data, but there's obviously a lot for.
I was just curious if it was double or triple or.
I mean, no, when you're looking at a ratio, but when you just have we have, there 7,000 cows having calves, so that's even a ratio of 24 calves per 100 cows, you're going to end up with a lot more elk than in a district where there's only 1,000 cows producing 40 cows.
What's the brown tine bull count this area?
I'd have to look it up, but there's a lot of them.
We're over objective.
Yeah, there's.
Objective is.
Yeah, I think there's 1,000 over. There's well over 1,000 bulls in the Snowies, but and way over 50% of them are brow tine.
Okay.
So.
There's a question in the back.
It seems to me that it's gonna be more beneficial for you guys to get comments based for each district than just a blanket region 4 comment that an accurate statement.
And that's what's asked for on the webpage. You can click on.
I think that's more reflective of local management, which is this management plan is focused in on local objectives, local management. But anything that, gives a statewide comment is welcome too, because it's not just in region 4, it's in other regions that have similar scenarios.
So this data then is available per district?
Yeah, if you go to our website, you can pretty much find this exact PowerPoint. Or get a hold of us, we can send you information.
So how much would you say is on the Wilkes brothers? When you're flying, can you tell, that's such a huge ranch, can you tell maybe what percentage of the population of that?
So,
2,000 is on their ranch?
So the thing with our flying is we fly one day out of the year and it's late winter. It's well after hunting season. They're on winter range. I could go back and look at a map and, say this many elk were on this cadastral and that sort of thing. But that doesn't necessarily mean this many elk are on this property year round or this many elk are here during the hunting season.
I was just curious if it was noticeable when you're flying, if there's much bigger population.
We definitely see a lot of elk around the foothills of the Little Snowy Mountains and then expanding out onto the prairie. So. Yep.
Here's an analogy along those lines is if we flew elk in the wilderness, summer, all the elk be in the wilderness. You fly it on winter ground, it's all out in the summer. They move.
It's,
Sonia's,
right about
experience is the
10%
same
of the
thing. They
districts
move
combined.
and disperse themselves onto those southern aspects and where elk want to winter.
That rate,
They may be on the west,
940,
they may
I
be
think
on
is
the
where we're at.
Yeah, I guess my question would be like, take a survey, why not survey the animals when they're where the hunting, where you can actually take them? You know, where you're actually gonna make a difference in the population as opposed to where they're never gonna be.
Difficult to survey.
They're not in big groups.
If you're a hunter, I'm sure you don't want a plane buzzing over you when you're about to take your shot.
I get enough
Well,
complaints.
If you send us a
Well, you
text
only do it once
message,
every
yeah.
year, so I wouldn't worry too much about it.
All right, Jake.
So, what I have to cover is basically all but one sliver of the Little Belts, the Castle Mountains and the east side of the Big Belts. So that's what we're going to talk about. And a couple things have changed. The commission chose to combine 413 and 432 last year to make a larger hunting district. And they also chose to combine 416 and 454, so that district between the Castles and Little Belts, that's all one district now. So at least for those two districts, we're really going to need to think about a new objective because we've basically erased, the previous objectives by combining those districts. So keep that in mind. We really need your help on that. In general, in the Little Belts, predation pressure is fairly light. Looking at all of those districts, the calf production is pretty good. Usually in the mid-20s, it can approach 30, exceed 30 some years, but it's the engine's running pretty hot. The bull objective, you'll see it consistently through this. For whatever reason, the department set the bull ratio objective of 5 bulls for 100 cows, which is about the lower limit of what even you could expect to effectively breed elk herd. When you start to get below 5, then your effective breeding is affected by that. So our bull objective as it stands now is kind of inconsequential. I'll tell you what the observed bull ratios are for those districts. Just know the current objective is extremely low for whatever reason. And this would be the new 413. So these numbers reflect the combination of the two existing objective numbers for 430, what was 432 and 413. I'll tell you kind of what the history is with 432. Jake can tell us about 413 because he historically managed that district. 432, you're basically talking about one group of elk. Winters, kind of Big Otter Creek, had a past objective of 325 with that range. And in general, we were right at the top end of that objective level and very steady. Depending on winter weather and observability, we're really kind of flatline. That herd was pretty stable under the current regulation. And just to set it up, in the Little Belts, Castles, Big Belts, the regulations are pretty liberal. Last year, we went to brow tine bull or antlerless elk in general. We have the 004 license available on non-Forest Service land. That's over the counter this year. 448 has some cow tags. And I'll tell you which districts have pretty liberal shoulder seasons that have been in place since 2015. But in general, it's a pretty liberal harvest opportunity in all those districts. 413, what's the status or history?
We're right at objective, if we're beating the bull objective, so kind of right where we want to be. And I think the switch to brow tine bull or antlerless only was a good switch. It's going to help those bull ratios, if anything. So
Slightly, it also helped make us consistent with some of the neighboring districts.
That's a bull tag area,
What's that?
bull tag.
Brow tine bull or antlerless elk, cow or calf on your general license.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But the change was it went to, so spikes are protected now where they hadn't been historically. I don't expect it to have much of a, just advance that age structure 1 year, but. And so with that combined, so 413 and 432's old objective just put together we've been able to maintain that, that overall herd in those two districts now, 413, all the way from Great Falls to Stanford, north end of the Little Belts, within that objective range.
Is there much block management?
There's some, not so much that I think the fact of having block management is really affecting our ability to pull the levers on that herd. They're pretty small. I guess in 413, I'd have to ask Jay, but in 432, it's nice to have the opportunity, but you're not like in some districts, the private land access isn't what's driving we get better than 50% of our harvest on public land in 432 at least. And no shoulder seasons in either one of those. But current management is, if that objective level remained, I don't see any trends that would indicate that we're going to exceed or fall below that objective anytime soon.
Jay, if that population is in the objective level there, first of all, I want to see more elk than that there. How come are you so liberal with the over-the-counter cow tags now, if we're in that range?
And those are the over-the-counter cow tags. That's a regional decision for one. I mean, there's a few districts that are not valid, but they're basically valid everywhere in Region 4. But they're specifically intended to provide tools to, hunters on private or non-Forest Service land. And we specifically didn't liberalize beyond just having the opportunity to take a cow in your general. Didn't offer additional opportunity on Forest Service. And Little Belts, that 900,000 acres of Forest Service is kind of a public land opportunity there. So that the over-the-counter opportunity was specifically intended to allow additional opportunity on private. Is that what you were?
Yeah, kind of.
And again, the shoulder season tool, in general, we only apply that in areas where we're not an area like this where we're kind of within objective or not looking to greatly reduce that elk population. We don't have that shoulder season opportunity in these districts. The ratios in 432 are kind of moderate. They run mid-teens to 20, depending on the year and the siteability, but it's kind of in that moderate range, but it's been running at least 15 bulls per 100 cows for as far back as I've been tracking it. I don't know, in 413.
I don't have it available.
I'd expect it was similar, but
Do you get very many damage calls?
we do in 432, and it's always in the same spot because those elk are always in the same spot. I mean, they're really local. And so it's the same ranches every year that have trouble, and we respond to that. The harvest with under the game damage hunts that we run is pretty moderate. We'll take 15, 20 cows a year, and that seems to redistribute them to satisfy the landowners that are being affected. And we've done a lot of stackyard fencing that's helped too. But it's every year.
So it's more of a haystack problem than a pivot problem?
Both standing crop and haystacks.
Okay.
Yeah. When you have 500 elk in a group show up, you're pissed, and so that's kind of the dynamic, and then you bump them, So 416, again, this is that district that's now combined. What we don't winter that many elk in the old 454. We, depending on how many cross the highway from the castles, we'll see between 250 and 350 in that unit, depending on the year. So the majority of the actual elk in the new 416 are in the old 416. The combined range for that, or the combined objective for that unit is 580 to 870, just putting those two objectives together. Again, it has a very low 5% or 5 bulls per 100 cow bull objective, which is kind of meaningless. And here's the trend we've been seeing. Last year, this last winter, I set an all-time record high count in 416 and a good number of elk in 454, old 454. And what's interesting, and we can talk about with the other districts, is that's not, as far as I can tell, displacement from another unit. If you can picture 416, it follows the Smith River on the east side. all the way over to Highway 89. The majority of those elk are on the west side of that district during the winter. And we flew 416, 446, and 445, 455 real close together in time. I don't believe that there was significant intermixing between those districts, and we saw that same trend in 446, 445, and 416. They were all either at the high level or a record high count. So that I believe that growth is real. And we're at a level in 416 that we've never been at before. Bull ratios are a little bit higher in 416, seeing in the mid 20s, sometimes even approaching 30, depending on siteability. And calf ratios seem to be higher in that unit than in some other public land dominated units in the Little Belts. It seems like the productivity on that west side of the Little Belts is higher than I see in other units. But that's real growth, and that's significant growth. And again, we don't have a shoulder season in 416. We have those other tools, but we haven't yet considered a shoulder season there. I'm getting pressure given the growth and the change over the last 4 years. I'm hearing from landowners there that they're saying, hey, 446 has the tool, why don't I? And just something that's going to come up. But
how quick can you implement a shoulder season?
Commission considers shoulder seasons every year. Whether to remove them or to implement them, they can
Not
do
every month.
No, what we can do every month is some of the other game damage, responses. We can do those immediately within a certain window. So that
I mean, because of the drought right now, you can't submit a proposal that this area probably needs a shoulder season.
they could theoretically, they have the authority to do it, but they don't like to do it once the regs are printed. It's just complicated. But we're gonna.
Don't talk complicated with that book of regulations.
Well, that's a good point.
You're not.
Yeah.
One more little thing like that. is
I should say,
nothing.
I haven't seen a case where they've implemented a shoulder season mid-season. That's usually something they consider leading into season setting, but they have said, we're gonna look at shoulder seasons every year and for whatever that's worth. But for now, 416 does not have that. It's got the standard seasons that you see in other districts, but we are at a record high level there and apparently growing.
Above average calf recruitment.
That one's a little bit higher. It's usually in the high 20s. I've seen it above that, but this last year we're at, depending on the unclassified cohort, in the high 20s. It's a good productive herd.
That open either sex center, is it just grow 10?
Right. All these districts, we tried to make it, standardize it finally. So it's brow tine bull or antlerless on your general, the 004 on non-Forest Service land. And then whatever, game damage or management seasons we need there.
And access is.
It's pretty good. The majority of that district is public land, Forest Service primarily, but during the winter when I count, they're all on private, of course, because that's where the winter range is. And we have done surveys looking at the land ownership under harvest. We do those periodically. There's pretty wide confidence intervals around those estimates, but we have them. And in this district, it looks like between 40 and 55% of the harvest happens on public, depending on, so it's kind of split. There's a lot of outfitting. There's some refuges in 416, but we also have pretty good access to, 418, if you can picture, this is on the far east side, probably the least associated with the Little Belt Mountains themselves, kind of that buffalo country, Garneal, Judith Gap, mostly private land, a little sliver of the Little Belts on the south side, the public land, Little Belts on the south side. And I also don't have a lot of confidence. I think there's a lot of movement between what winters in 418 and what's available for harvest in 418. We see a lot of movement over the top there to the south, but we've set a management objective historically by looking at the wintering number of elk and the demographics of those elk in the unit during winter. The current objective is 150 with that range, same very low bull ratio. And we've seen a pretty dramatic increase in our survey numbers, and to be honest with you, I think a lot of that has to do with survey effort and method. Looking back at how that unit was flown before I started doing it, it was less intensely surveyed. And so I for a bunch of reasons decided to do a more thorough job in 418. And so there's some of that, but I also think we're seeing some growth. When you look at the harvest numbers in 418, we've also seen a little uptick. And every year we'll see about 300 head there now, but it is pretty stable at that higher level. Anything on 418? I'm curious about that because it's just one of those districts I'm trying to figure out.
So seeing something like that where it levels out like that at 300, would that be your suggestion to have maybe your range around 300 then, evidently?
So what I can tell you in 418, the tolerance is really pretty good. A lot of that private land is outfitted, and so there's some tolerance for elk just kind of baked in. What's not outfitted is public land, and so you have that tolerance there. I don't get a lot of complaints. We dealt with one last year. It was pretty small, couple elk, and that solved it. That's what I can tell you is tolerance is pretty good at that level, and it seems to sort of be stable at that level given the current regulations, and so it leads you to that conclusion. But
yeah, the elk could cross over from the west end of the snow.
we just haven't seen it recently. I mean, we had that big
There's been some infamous slaughter.
infamous stuff, but that's not been since what, about 2012? I don't know if you
Yeah, it was
remember.
like 2016 was the
Oh, is
last
it more
time.
recent?
But it's really weird because those elk on the west end of the Snowies have been growing, and I've like
We've been waiting for it.
formally, like, it's like every time they got around or over 400, they'd cross and it'd be a mess. Well, now they're at 800, 900, and they haven't crossed in several years.
Yeah.
They've gotten down low a few times and
Took
the
down the elk
hunters on
crossing
the
sign.
four. They've gotten down low a few times and it's kind of been staved off by some landowners and hunters kind of doing their own thing. Maybe that's, but I don't know. It used to happen after the hunting
Yeah, I
season.
was just gonna say, sometimes that's, we don't have a shoulder
Used to
season.
happen right after we could do game damage and we couldn't do anything about it, so. We had a couple good years where we came across and we put in some drastic game damage effort and talked to the landowner on the other side and some minor changes, and that could be it. We don't know. It's just been weird. Because it was every year it would just be, as soon as that winter hit, season was over, we couldn't do anything. They crossed.
Maybe you finally got the herd cow.
Maybe all the herd cats.
All the herd cows, yeah.
So if you can picture 420 and 448, I think of them as, I mean, they're separate units and they're managed separately for good reason, but they're the same herd. We've done telemetry on this herd and seen that pattern, collar a bunch of elk on the game range and watch how they move the rest of the year, and they move up into 448 and the edges of old 432 and 454, but they're basically in 448 in that middle fork country all summer and fall, and then move right back down the game range. They basically are public land elk year round, publicly available in some form or fashion year round. They've got a point objective of 1,200 head with that same 20% range, same low bull objective, bull ratio objective. But on 420, rifle hunting's by permit that we can adjust. There's some V licenses in 448 and 420. You can use them in either one. We can adjust that level. And we've kind of hit a sweet spot, in my opinion, given the good calf production, with those tools. That herd, it's kind of like the Sun River. I don't see Grant, but where we have the tools to manage, throughout the hunting seasons, we're able to maintain that herd right within that objective range. And at the same time, the bull quality, the bull age structure, it's not the elk horns, or it's not 410, but it's good for a public land elk herd. We're running high 20s bull ratios and a good proportion of 6-point or better bulls in that herd. It's just if every herd that I manage behaved this way, it'd be a good situation. But our current management seems to be achieving our objectives in this area.
Good access.
Good access to elk, good access year round, and because we control the winter range management, we can affect that management at a finer scale with more precision than we can in other districts. .446 is on the east side of the Big Belts, kind of south from 455 all the way down to Highway 12. It's a big unit, probably 25-ish%, 30% public land. The majority is private, and almost all of the winter elk habitat is private. The current objective is 950 with that same range. The bull objective is a little bit higher, 7%. I don't think that's meaningful, but anyway, that's what it is in the current plan. And it's kind of the same story in that unit as some of the others. We've seen a pretty remarkable recent growth from about 2018. The difference in this unit is, if you remember back in 2015 when they did the pilot shoulder seasons, 446, 451, 452 in Region 4 were the three districts that piloted that shoulder season concept. So we had tremendous interest in participating in that, thousands of hunters. And in 2015, we killed over 1,000 elk in that district. I mean, it was remarkable. And
So two components of that, Jay. Piloted it, one area in the whole state that you could shoot elk late season and the shoulder season. Landowner participation was extremely good. In fact, most lands were open. And so a combination of a lot of interest, a lot of hunters on the ground, a lot of elk on private land, a lot of private land open to hunting, resulted in a phenomenal harvest that first shoulder season.
so in 2015, we killed over 700 cows. By the next year, antlerless harvest dropped by half, and it's maintained itself at, between 250 and 200 head cows in that district since that big kill in 2015. And a lot of that, I mean, you can almost, when I fly, I can almost tell ownership by where the elk are during that winter period. They figured out where they're going to get shot at and where they're not. It only took 1 year for that herd to figure that out. The bull ratios are pretty high in that district. They're running in the mid high 20s, and very good calf production. This has a shoulder season that starts August 15th today, runs all the way through February, up to 3 elk. Kind of the gloves are off in this district, but that's what we're seeing. So this year was an all-time record count and exceeded 3,500 head for the first time since we've been keeping records. Interesting, and I don't want to dwell on it, but the herd south of, say, Rock Creek, in the south end of the district has been fairly stable. Where we're seeing the real dramatic growth is in the north end, closer to 445, 455, north end of 416. That whole complex associated with Devil's Kitchen is where we're seeing the growth. 451, who mentioned changing regional boundaries. We did that a few years ago. We kind of annexed. This used to be a part of Region 3. This is the unit that's south of Highway 12 on the south end of the Big Belts. Those elk had always been more associated, and the landowners have always been more associated with Region 4. So we carved that district off, brought it into Region 4, and kept an objective that was at that time a sub-objective that Region 3 had for that portion of the unit that was on the east side of the Big Belts. It used to go east-west and be on the Canyon Ferry side and on the Smith side. That objective, we just carried it over when we created the district and set it at 275 with the same range. The challenge there is that the number of elk wintering in that district is incredibly variable. Some winters you'll have elk come up off the Climbing Arrow from the south, and I've counted as many as 1,700 head in that district. And then I had one year where I had 26 elk in the entire district. It makes, you know, setting an objective and meeting an objective based on that winter count super tough, because you have a hard winter, you have an open winter, you have whatever happens south on the Climbing Arrow that forces a bunch north. Just makes the objective really, really tough to assess or meet in that district. I wonder if we couldn't do a better job in this unit in being creative about what an objective looks like, recognizing the fact that the elk are so mobile and so flashy in that unit that some years you'll have huge numbers. The day you fly, you'll have a huge number, and then other years, the day you fly, you'll have virtually none. And that's not a success or failure of elk management. It's just the way they move through that country. It's super open, and they just get bumped around. So I'd appreciate any input anybody has, and love to talk to anybody that knows that unit about how you could better devise a objective that makes sense there, recognizing how the elk actually behave. Pretty good access, block management, some, you know, free access, there is some outfitting, and really good access. This does have a shoulder season, and during the shoulder season, there's really good landowner cooperation. So we have the ability to get some cow harvest there, but the availability of elk is so variable that it's really tough to even set, let alone
So is
meet
the
an objective.
variability during hunting season as well?
Can be, they move into 580, they move into, you know, 446, they move north. It's just really tough. You know, it's so open, and when they get pushed, they go. And, you know, we get harvest there during the season, and the outfitters and some of the private landowners are able to sustain themselves there, but, you know, the pressure just really moves them around. The bull quality and age structure is generally quite a bit lower there than in other districts. And I think that's just a function of the vulnerability of those bulls to harvest, given the landscape. I think the last one I have is 452. Was it 4 years ago we combined, or 6? A few years ago we combined what the castles used to be split in half, north-south, between 449, 452. We put those together because we always thought of them together, managed them the same way. Combine those two objectives to a point objective of 600 head, which again just carried forward the combined 2005 objectives with that same range, same low 5% bull ratio, and a minimum of 30 total bulls observed during the postseason elk surveys. Again, that doesn't really drive anything. We've never been close to that. 452 was another one of those districts that was subject to that first pilot shoulder season in 2015, and it's maintained that shoulder season since then. Access during that shoulder season has sort of declined over time, and the same story there. Good harvest in 2015, and those elk figured out where they were safe, and we've seen declining shoulder season harvest since 2015. But it has, I think, that combined with the standard regulation that we've got has leveled out that population. Certainly the growth, we're growing at 15% a year when we started this thing, which is about the biological, you know, capacity of an elk herd to grow. And we've leveled that out at, you know, something like 1,100 head pretty much every year since 2018, managing the way we've been managing. Bull ratios are a little bit lower here. If you can picture the castles, you get a hard winter during general, they all filter down to private, and the bulls are pretty vulnerable, and virtually everything around that range is hunted. There's not pure refuge during the general season. And so our age structure is a little bit lower. The proportion of bulls that are 6 point and better is kind of at the low end of what we see in the Little Belts complex. And the bull ratios are hovering around 10 to 13 or 14 per 100 cows. So a little bit lower there, a little bit younger age class of bulls, but we've managed to level out that growth, at least for the last 5 or 6 years, at that 1,100-ish level. think that's all I've got.
All right, so if you have any other questions, we'll sit around. Being so cool in here and nice, and you want to sit around and enjoy it. I hope the water at least cools down a little bit. But again, this is your opportunity to look at what we have for objectives today. What are they, what should they be? What should the management of each one of these elk management areas look like in the future, knowing that things have changed since 2005. Knowing that the law still states we have to manage to objective. Okay. This is your opportunity to put in your 2 cents as to what it should be going forward. Fish, Wildlife, Parks, our biologists put in their 2 cents, what the habitat should, be, what the carrying capacity is, what they think the elk number should be. The public does the same, landowners, et cetera, all the interested parties. That's then going to be filtered through our elk management person that's right. That draft will be put up, given to the commission will put it out for public comment. Once that draft is done, you get a second chance. This is really where the rubber meets the road from the standpoint of you as landowners, sportsmen, outfitters, whatever, interested parties. This is where we need to really make a difference in what that plan says. And I believe our commitment after we get this thing done is to review it a lot more frequently, like every 5 years instead of every 20 years. And as we've seen in the last few years, land ownership and number of people coming into the state has changed dramatically, whether it be due to COVID or whatever. People discovered Montana, and I think things are going to continue to change. So think about the future. Think about those objectives and how we should approach management of elk at the local level of your interest. So we'll stick around and answer questions specific to any one of these hunting districts or in general, as long as I can get out of here before 11. Brad, if you want to keep me here until 11, I'll sit here until 11, just as long as you stay too. So anyway, you're welcome to stay, ask questions, talk about it. I appreciate you guys coming to the meeting, listening, and thinking about what we're going to look at for the future. Appreciate you coming. We'll have other meetings too if you want to come to the Stanford, Choteau, Chester,
Augusta.
No, I don't have White Sulphur is tomorrow. Isn't it? Yeah, White Sulphur is tomorrow. So feel free to come to some of these other meetings. I've seen other people at some of the other meetings.
Gary, I made a note just to keep score. You had 21 districts reported on, and 21 were over, 2 were under, and 4 were at objective, just for a general official.